everybody. I'm going to take a little time in this video to go over your assignment from last week, the practice with rhetorical analysis. So if you remember in this assignment, you had two images to choose from, and you had to choose one of them and answer 5 questions about it. So the first image was from the Montana Meth Project, Meth Not Even Once, and the second image was a pro-wildlife poster with the tiger outside mopping the floor outside of the peep show. So I'm going to go through both images, and obviously whichever one you chose for the assignment, you want to pay very close attention to what I have to say about that image, but it would be a really good idea to still listen to what I have to say about the image you did not choose. You already know the questions. They're the same questions that you answered for your image. But this can still give you a little bit of practice thinking about how to approach an image or a text when you are asked to do a rhetorical analysis. Okay, so first and foremost, let's remind ourselves that when we are engaging in rhetorical analysis, we are not responding to the argument or engaging with the argument. This kind of exercise has nothing to do with how we feel about the topic or the argument that's being made. We are being super objective. We're looking at everything totally from the outside and simply looking at how the argument was constructed. That's it. Okay? So that is a very important element of rhetorical analysis to keep in mind. And you have to keep it in mind from the very beginning all the way through. Because once you start to let yourself get involved in the topic and get involved in the argument, then it's no longer rhetorical analysis. And you want to make sure that you are truly doing rhetorical analysis, because that's what you're going to be asked to do on the final exam essay. So this is why I wanted us to get a little bit of practice and start working on those skills. Because so far, the biggest thing you've been working on is the course project, which is an argumentative paper where you are engaging in the argument. You're presenting the argument, right? But now we're kind of shifting gears. So I want to make sure that we get some practice on this before you do the final exam. So our first image was the Montana Meth Project with the image of the dirty bathroom, and it said, "No one thinks they'll lose their virginity here. Meth will change that." And we know that it comes from the Montana Meth Project, and their slogan is "Meth, not even once." Okay? Then it gives us the web address, notevenonce.com. So the first question you had to answer is, what is the main claim in the ad? This one gives us a clue because we have the project's slogan on the image. Now that's just a slogan, it's not a claim, but that slogan can help you create the claim. And I would say the claim would be just as simple as, no one should try meth, not even once. That seems to be what their overall argument is. You could have worded that differently, but the overall gist should be something about never trying meth, because that is definitely what the overall claim is. Now, how does the ad support this claim? All right, how do the visuals support it? How do the words support it? Well, they're trying to convince us that it is a really bad idea to try meth, even once. Never, like they're basically saying, never try it. Don't even go there. Not even once. How are they trying to convince us of this? Well, let's look at the words first, okay? No one thinks they'll lose their virginity here. Meth will change that. So the first way that they're trying to persuade us is through those words. And I would say that that is mostly an appeal to pathos, playing on our emotions. You know, no one thinks they'll lose their virginity here. Meth will change that. Also some logic. There's some logos going on there. Because the idea is, if we can logically understand that, as horrible as this may seem, meth can change how we feel about things, change the decisions that we make, and logically then, to avoid that situation, we should never try meth. Now, those words kind of have to be taken alongside the image, because it says no one thinks they'll lose their virginity here. Well, if we don't see the image, then that makes no sense. So you do have to look at them both together, and the image, of course, is a very dirty public bathroom. And obviously then, now we're supposed to understand better that losing your virginity in that dirty public restroom is what we want to avoid. And that if we try meth, even once, then there's a possibility that we would find ourselves in this situation where we might lose our virginity in this dirty public bathroom. Definitely an appeal to pathos and logos there. Now, there's more to that, because what if I'm looking at this and, you know, I'm a mother of 3. Clearly, I'm not a virgin. So, how would that image affect those of us who have already lost our virginity, those of us who aren't necessarily interested in sex very much at all in the first place, perhaps? How would this image and those words still affect us? Do they? Is there a way to go beyond what's being presented in this image? And that's why I think the claim is that general claim of, you know, meth can cause you to make really bad choices, so you should never try it, not even once. Because we'll get to the reasoning here in a minute, but this image is not just about losing your virginity in a dirty public bathroom. But certainly the evidence that they use, how they're supporting it, is that disturbing visual with the text together. Right? Question 3 was, to what common values does the ad appeal? And I told you to refer to the slide in the Values and Assumptions PowerPoint in week 4. It gives you a list of common values, and that list is not exhaustive by any means. There's hundreds of other common values that we could talk about. So what does this image, this ad, what kind of values does it appeal to? Meaning, what do the creators of this ad, what do they assume we value? Well, how about self-respect, cleanliness, health, dignity? Because those 4 things, if we value them, then this image, this idea, this scenario would be disturbing to us, right? If we don't value health, if we don't value cleanliness, if we don't value self-respect and dignity, then a good bit of this ad is totally lost on us. We kind of have to value those things in order for this ad to be effective. Some other things that, other values that the ad kind of expresses, we value joy, we value happiness, because the idea is that if we value those things, we would not want this to happen to us. So the idea is that this would not be a happy thing. This would not be a good thing. Maybe we also value knowledge and logic and openness and maybe truth and common sense, right? We value those things, so therefore this type of brutal honesty would be appealing to us. You know, maybe we also have to value humility, that we have to be willing to admit that things like this can happen to anyone if you try meth. I think if you don't admit that it's possible, if you don't understand that it could happen, then the ad is lost on you as well. So there has to be an element of humility that's there. But I think those are some of the biggest values that I see coming through. And that first set especially, you know, cleanliness, health, self-respect, dignity, they seem to be hitting on those the most. Now, question 4 is kind of like the next step up from values. What are the assumptions in this ad? What do the creators assume about us? What do they assume we value? What do they assume we believe? What do they assume we think or feel about this issue? If we're going to agree with this argument, what do they assume about us? Well, I think, you know, the first thing is that they assume we care about this issue. They assume we care about what happens to people who use drugs. If you don't give a crap about people who choose to use, then this ad is not going to have any effect on you. So they assume that there is at least some level of care involved. I think they also assume that we understand why meth would cause you to make this type of choice. And that's a big assumption if you think about it. Maybe it's a valid assumption given, you know, the drug crisis in our country. But you do have to really have some inkling. They assume we have a basic understanding of how meth affects you. Right? So if our let's put it this way, if our only understanding of drug use is, let's just say, alcohol and marijuana, we are not going to understand the logic they're trying to use in the image, because it's just not that it's not impossible. Using any drug could cause you to make some poor choices, but they're making such a big deal out of it. It's almost like they're saying that meth, this is a common occurrence for people who use meth. And I don't think it's a common occurrence for, you know, drinkers, casual drinkers, people who, you know, smoke pot. I don't think we would make the same connection if that's our only understanding of drug use. So they're assuming that we know a little bit about what meth does. I think they're also assuming, and I think it's a pretty valid assumption, this is a valid one here, but they are assuming that we will dislike the image, the thought of losing your virginity or having sex at all in that dirty public bathroom. If we look at that image and we think, what's the big deal? Then the ad will be a failure to us. It will not be persuasive. So, in order for the ad to be effective, we have to look at that image and feel a negative emotion about it. So they're assuming that we will. And I think they're also assuming, and I mentioned this before, that that we're humble enough to understand and admit that something like this could happen. If you are the type of person who always thinks, it'll never happen to me, I'm stronger than that, it'll be different for me, then this logic is kind of lost on you as well. But if you are, if you have enough, humbleness and humility to admit that, even you could find yourself in that situation if you tried meth, then the ad's a little more effective. All right, so those are just some of the assumptions. What premises, this is question 5, what premises, stated or unstated, would the audience have to accept before accepting the main claim? So this builds off of all of our answers, especially to 3 and 4. So the image is making this overall claim, right? Think of that as the thesis statement, right? What are the smaller subclaims that are present? Think of it as the main points, right? So like you write an essay, you have your thesis statement, which is the overall thing you're trying to prove in the essay. But in order to prove that, you have these smaller subpoints, right? That you have to, convince us of and build on in order to get us to accept the main overall claim. This is not so easy to do with a visual image, but it's there. So the overall claim is meth, not even once, right? Meth can cause you to make really bad choices, so you should never try it, not even once. Okay. The first premise there is that meth leads to unimaginable bad choices, things you would never conceive of otherwise. Meth leads to really bad, unexpected choices, such as losing your virginity in a really dirty public bathroom. The next premise is that no one thinks that this would ever happen to them. The next premise is meth could make it a reality. Even trying it just once could lead you down this road. That could be, and this was where some of the support for this premise would come into play, it could mean that even the very first time you try it, meth could mess with your head so badly that you find yourself in this situation. Or it could mean that meth is very addictive, and even trying it once will lead you to try it again and again and again until pretty quickly an addiction is formed, and then that's when you find yourself in this type of situation. So meth can lead to these really unexpected bad choices. No one thinks it would happen to them, but meth could make it a reality. That was the next premise. And then finally, the only way to make sure it never happens to you is to never try meth, not even once. That gets us back to the main claim. See how we take those pieces. The smaller steps you have to take to get to that overall claim. Now, out of all of that, I never talked about my opinion of the image. I never mentioned my feelings about the topic. I did not engage with the argument in any way. I simply looked at the elements of the argument. And the idea is to look at all of those elements to see how they all work together to form the whole. That's what our goal is with rhetorical analysis. So let's try it again with the other image. So the other image is the tiger mopping the floor outside of the peep show, right? So the first question for this one, what is the main claim of this ad? You might be tempted to say that the claim is any job is better than being a tourist attraction. That's not really the claim, though. Just like with the meth image, the words that get our attention aren't the main claim. That's a premise. The main claim comes from the small print that says stop lifetime imprisonment, skip taking pictures with tigers on your next holiday. So, I would say we're looking at something along those lines. What they're trying to convince us of here is to stop partaking in activities that imprison wildlife. That's what they want us to stop doing. That's what they're calling for. So, how does the image and how do the words support that idea? Well, we have the main premise, any job is better than being a tourist attraction. So, you don't necessarily have to see the image to understand that claim, that subclaim. Any job is better than being a tourist attraction. I understand what that means. I don't have to see an image to know what they're getting at. However, to reinforce that idea, they have the image, which is the tiger mopping up outside of a peep show. So we have obviously a great deal of pathos being used here. They are pulling on our emotional heartstrings to get us to feel sorry, to get us to feel pity, empathy, and compassion towards this animal and the situation that he's currently in versus the situation he came from. Because what was his previous job? Tourist attraction. The image and the words, again, just like the first example, they're working together to help support the overall claim, which is for us to stop participating in these tourist attraction activities. So, I want to come back to this, keep working on how it's supported. I want to go ahead and look at the common values, question 3. So some of the values that are expressed in the image, obviously we have to value nature and the environment. We have to value animals. Maybe we have to value freedom and independence. Because the tiger right now is free and independent, able to make his own choices, right? He has dignity because he's choosing the job he wants to do and isn't being forced into some sort of job. I think the pathos that's being used kind of goes with these values here, that we have to value maybe fairness and empathy. We have to value compassion. And interestingly enough, it's a totally different image, but I think we have to kind of value cleanliness in this one too, because he's mopping up outside of a peep show. So we would have to understand and value that he's trying to clean up. And then I think self-respect is another value that is expressed here. We have to value all those things for this image to affect us. If we don't value animals, it's not going to have any effect on us. If we don't value freedom and independence and self-respect, this image is not going to mean anything to us. If we don't value dignity if we don't value empathy and compassion, this image is not going to affect us. We have to value all of those things in order for this argument to persuade us the way the creator wants it to. What are some assumptions that are being made? Well, this goes back to the values. We have to care about animals. They assume we care about animals. And if we don't, then the ad fails. So in order for us to even pay attention to this and think about it and agree with it, we have to value the lives of animals. We have to, they assume we think tourist attractions are bad. They assume we think that animals in captivity of some sort being used for human entertainment is a bad thing. They assume we feel that way. They assume that we can make the connection between tourist attractions and animals in captivity. What I mean there is, when you think of tourist attractions, let's think of some very famous ones in the United States. We've got the Statue of Liberty. Think of D.C. We have the Lincoln Memorial, Jefferson Memorial, Washington Memorial, the Vietnam Memorial. Those are all tourist attractions. Think of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, right? Those are tourist attractions. The pyramids in Egypt. Like, we know what tourist attractions are. The creators of this image assume that we equate tourist attractions and these captive animals for entertainment. They assume we will think they are one and the same, that they are equal. And that's important, because if you don't see this business of getting your picture taken with tigers, if you don't see that as a tourist attraction, then the logic isn't going to make any sense to you here. The logos fails. And then probably the pathos along with it. Another thing that it assumes is that we think mopping the floor after a peep show is a really bad job, but that it's still better than being a tourist attraction. So they assume that, to a small degree at least, we are more okay with peep shows than we are tourist attractions that feature animals in captivity. And just think about that. If you are a person looking at this image and that sort of sexual decadence of a peep show, that might be going against so many of your values that in your mind, no, that job actually is not better than being a tourist attraction. So you have to, but at the same time, we do have to feel like mopping up after the peep show is not a good thing. We have to feel, they assume that we would not want that job. And that's where a good bit of the argument rests, on that assumption. They assume that we would feel that mopping up after a peep show is a really bad job. But even as bad as it is, it's still better than being a tourist attraction. But that whole argument fails if it goes one way or the other. It has to hit that sweet spot. If we feel like mopping up after a peep show is the worst job ever and should absolutely never be engaged in, then the argument fails because it's too much. If we don't really see mopping up after a peep show as that big of a deal, Like, it's no different than mopping up in a grocery store, whatever, or mopping up as a, if you're a custodian in a school. Mopping's mopping, doesn't matter where. Or, if you're like, at least it's a job, putting food on the table, then the logic is not as strong. It has to hit that sweet spot where the people who are looking at this poster think, wow, mopping up after a peep show, that's like one of the worst jobs ever. But then any job is better than being a tourist attraction. Oh, okay. So being a tourist attraction is even worse than mopping up floors after a peep show. Got it. So we have to assume that. What are the premises that build up to the main claim? Now the main claim, again, has to do with stopping that tourist attraction. So for this, we'll look at the premise that we see first off. Any job is better than being a tourist attraction. So the next premise then is his current job or his previous job was a tourist attraction. Now he's mopping outside the peep show. That job existed as a tourist attraction because there's a demand for it. That's the next premise. The next premise is the reason there's a demand for it is because people will pay for it. So, next jump is to the main claim, which is we have the power to change it by choosing not to partake. If we can end it if we simply choose not to pay the money to partake in that tourist attraction. See how the premises build to that. So, any job is better than being a tourist attraction. So, if his current job is being a tourist attraction, that job exists because there's a demand for it. The reason there's a demand for it is because people will pay for it. So in order to make it stop, people have to stop paying for it. Right? If there's no longer a demand, then these animals can choose their own destinies. Now, we also have to forgive the fact that they're having a tiger mop up after a peep show. Obviously, there's a break in reality there, but we get it. If you don't understand that, though, then this is going to be a really weird image for you to look at if you think that the tiger's really going to be mopping up after a peep show. But I think we can all approach it from the same place for the most part. Anyway, again, there's no responding to this issue. We're not engaging with it. We're not talking about how it affects us personally, whether or not we agree with the claim, whether or not we find it persuasive, what we think needed to be added. None of that. None of that. It's simply what went into making this argument. What elements are there? All the things we've learned and talked about over the last, 7-8 weeks. What do you see in the argument? How did the argument get made? That's it. Now, sometimes in rhetorical analysis, you might be given permission to include a section where you talk about how effective the argument was after you have analyzed all the elements. You might be able to then spend a paragraph or two looking at, okay, now that we know how the argument was made, let's talk about how effective it was or wasn't. And again, that's still not engaging with it. That's just looking at, okay, here's where the logic failed. Here's where the pathos went overboard. Thinking about a typical audience. If it's a historical piece, you can actually talk about how it truly affected people. But for the most part, if you're being asked to analyze something, it should be objective, technical, very clinical and clean, and your opinions and reactions are nowhere to be found. Just analysis, all right? So, hopefully this gives you a little bit more insight into what you're going to be asked to do for the final exam essay. We will have a little more practice this week, but if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, you guys are free to move on to the next lesson.